Kerry was born in Aberdeen. She has published 2 novels. She has won the Scottish First Book Award and France's most prestigious award for foreign fiction. You've been shortlisted for countless others. You're currently working on a non-fiction book called Lowborn and a series of columns for The Pool, which take you back to the towns of your childhood as she investigates her own past and what it means to be poor in Britain today. Kerry has founded the Woe Mentoring Project and has written for Grazia, Guardian Review, Observe a New Review, and the Metro. She has represented the British Council in South Korea, mentored with Ideas Tap and TLC, teaches for the Arvon Foundation, and was commissioned by the Writers' Centre Norwich to give a provocation on diversity as part of their National Conversation series. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline. And also, just thank you so much for what you just said. Like, I think it shouldn't have to be a brave thing to say I grew up in council estates, but I think it often is. It takes stepping out of line to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So what I really wanted to start off with was discussing, we claim to be an industry that's in tune with people. We claim to be an industry that understands the nation it represents. How can that be the case if we're an industry that's closed to people from a variety of backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, obviously what I should say is that I primarily work in publishing, and before that I worked for NGOs, both very middle class industries, middle and upper class, both primarily accessed through unpaid internships, often 3 or 4 of them. I got into NGOs in 2003, so I managed to get in answering the phones, and then I worked my way up to project manager. But had I not gotten at that point, I don't think I would have ever been able to sort of advance beyond sort of answering the phones, because it just wasn't it was that industry then, and now it's not. And publishing's much the same. Publishing is shaped by agents who choose the writers, and then editors who choose the books that we will read. And their vision is shaped by where they come from. We read books because we want to experience new things, but also because we want to recognize ourselves, and we want books to resonate with us. If all of the tastemakers in publishing are middle and upper class, which they often are because they've mainly got that access through unpaid internships, and because entry-level salaries are so low and it's a very London-centric industry, then that means that loads and loads of people are being denied access. And that's before you even look at the structural issues of writers from poorer backgrounds trying to get into that industry. What I will say, which I think is fantastic, is that I've been published since 2012. Since then, even then, in those sort of short 6 years, I've seen real progresses in publishing. We know there's an issue. Lots of schemes have been implemented, not just by small independent presses who do a great job of that and are obviously more flexible and adaptable, but by really big ones, so Hachette and Penguin Random House. And that really shows that they're committed to making that change, because apart from anything else, it's good business, like we had this amazing diversity in this country and these amazing voices. And as you say, we should be representing the full spectrum of that incredible society, and people want that. Yeah.
So when you talk about the changes that have been made, can you share some of those changes with us? Because I think, what can we learn as the advertising industry from a parallel industry, perhaps?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that I love what Bloom are doing. I mean, this is I don't think publishing has something sort of similar. They have young publishers, but this is the first time that I've seen sort of a group of women coming together to collectivize. About 5 years ago, I did set up something called the Women Mentoring Project, and that was because if you want to write, if you're not in London, if you don't have a lot of money for writing opportunities, you can feel really isolated, and it already feels difficult. If you come like me from a background where I grew up in council estates and homeless bed and breakfasts, and I left school at 15, never did I imagine I could be sitting up here and calling myself an author. And so I want to find a way to get access to those women. And so 140 women in the publishing industry, professional writers and editors and agents, really, really, successful women, offer up their time for free to women so that they can be mentored into the writing industry. They've also, Penguin Random House have started introducing blind applications. So they remove all the identifying sort of attributes from applications. So all you're looking at is their personal statement and their qualifications. Takes out that all the biases that you might have when you're looking at an application. They've also mainly stopped unpaid internships. They still exist, but in the last 4 years, we've seen a real change where people know that you're not going to be able to come and work in London if you come from Birmingham for free, where will you live? Where will you live in London with no salary? I mean, live under a bridge, but make sure you get your spreadsheets right. And the other thing that they've really started doing, and I don't know if this is an issue for us, is pay transparency. So a lot of entry level positions are advertised as commensurate with experience. And if you need to pay the bills, you want to know how much you're going to earn, right? You're adding it up and working it out, and that's how you know if you can afford to apply for that job. And the final thing they started doing is saying, we want this job to be open to people from all backgrounds, particularly lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And that is how you start to say to people, you're welcome, come. And the final thing is, it's been a good few years for publishing. The final thing they started doing was they started going out to the regions. Like, publishing is enormously London-centric. I live in Liverpool, but I come down to London like maybe once or twice a week. And so what they started doing is they started not expecting people to climb over massive mountains to get to them, but actually going out to the regions and finding really talented, motivated people who are in the regions who just need that little bit of support to bridge that gap between, the town that they're living in and this London, this sort of like London elitist sort of place. So.
Thank you. I think there's some incredible things we can learn, and certainly we can adopt as an advertising industry from that. Speaking a bit more personally about your experience in being an author and journalism and NGOs before, did you ever feel the pressure to not reveal?
Yeah, I mean, all of the time. I think as women, I won't speak for everyone, but for me personally as a woman, I've always felt, I was talking about this, you're already trying to adapt to a workplace often. You're making sort of often compromises that you wouldn't choose to make because of the sort of structure that we exist within. And then when I went into NGOs, that's a very middle class background. And I didn't want people to know that I'd grown up in council estates for the reason that I thought people would judge me. And I was right. I worked at an AIDS NGO, and a guy got off the phone and he put it down. He went, ugh, that sounded like someone who grew up in a council estate. I know. And I was his boss. I was his boss, like by quite a few levels. And I said, what sort of person do you think that is? But interestingly, I never challenged him on it. And it's only, and then when I published my first book, which is a very working class book, I did speak about my working class background because it felt important for people to know that it was coming from a place of sort of authenticity. But I still didn't say that I'd left school at 15 because I didn't want people to think I was thick, even though the reasons for me leaving school early were much more complex than that. And I didn't tell people that I'd lived in homeless B&Bs or that I'd been in care, because that gives you a sort of, there's like the worthy working class and the unworthy working class, and I didn't want to be seen as that. And so the book I'm writing, Lowborn, is really about assimilating that, because what happens is, so my books ended up being more successful than I expected. I certainly never expected to be sitting up here in front of all of you guys or, doing tours in France. And I found that I was play acting. You end up, you're not authentic anymore. You end up sort of becoming what people want you to be. And as a woman, I found that I was already moving myself into all sorts of shapes anyway. And so the book is really about saying that I won't do that anymore. And really the first step, I think, is being open about it, so people know that the unworthy working class person sitting next to them is their colleague and their mate and someone who kicks arse every single day in their job. And the other thing is speaking out when you hear that casual classism, when someone says chav, or that sounds like someone who sits in a council estate, or all those sort of people want to buy this product. What do you mean by those sorts of people? In exactly the same way you would if it was racism or homophobia or sexism. And it's a harder conversation to have because it's amorphous, but it has to be had. It's all about challenging, I think. So.
Thank you.
I'll get down from my soapbox.
No, it's brilliant. And I think, a lot of what you said around the kind of trying to morph yourself into fit with someone, like it particularly really resonates with me. We've talked a bit about what individuals can do to help, so calling it out, but that is quite reactionary. So that's when you hear something negative. So what can individuals do as hiring managers? What can they do as colleagues and friends to try and create a more inclusive workplace from a variety of backgrounds?
I think one of the best things you can do, I'm always saying this, like, pass it down. We do it in the publishing industry, but we're doing it more. Like, if you have a little bit of power, if you have a little bit of platform, pass that down to people. And don't just go for, like, the person who lives in Clapham, who's come for the internship. Like, try and give that person who maybe doesn't see, I know that you talk a little bit about cultural fit, which I think is used as a guise for, we just want people like us, So hire the person who is not like you, because also they bring new insights. There's loads of diversity studies that show that actually companies that embrace diversity are actually much more creative and much more proactive, because you have a range of ideas and opinions around the table. And the other thing I think is, you know, check your own privilege and your own assumptions. I can't tell you how many times I've sat at dinner parties in Islington and I've seen people just very, very casually, like, sort of drop, you know, something a bit classist or a bit judgmental. Like, and that's people who read The Guardian and buy fair trade meat and, you know, circulate 1,000 petitions, you know, who just do it without even thinking. And part of that, I think, is because it's not nice having to admit that the reason why you're where you are is partly because you had more privilege than someone else, you know? It's hard to admit that, but I think you have to start admitting that and opening up the doors a little bit.
Thank you. I think that's really interesting, because I've heard a lot of that kind of casual classism, particularly around Brexit. You know, I've heard so many comments of, well, it was all the people on council estates that voted leave, and I kind of was like, well,
factually inaccurate.
Yeah,
it was older rich pensioners.
For a start, factually inaccurate. But from a second point of view, actually, you know,
an excuse to sort of let out those opinions that suddenly seemed valid, you know, and that's also very dangerous. You know, it's insidious. It's like everything else. I think you've got to tackle it really robustly. We're not in a time where we can sit on our, can I say arses? It's a public, I'm doing it. We're not in a time where we can sit on our arses and you know, just let things pass. We have to challenge everything.
And when we've talked about kind of what we can do as individuals and your own journey, well, you know, if there is someone in this audience today who perhaps some of what we've said has resonated, and perhaps they're kind of struggling, what would you say to them? How would you get them to reveal themselves?
I think I think revealing yourself is a very personal thing. I think you get that. Like, you know, you do it when you're ready. It's like, you know, coming out or telling people you really like ABBA. It's something you build up to, you know. But I think the important thing is and something that I really have only just learned in the last few years is that everything that someone who is working class has done, and especially if you're a woman, has done it like, you know, Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, they've done it backwards in heels, you know, like not only have you overcome the challenges it takes to get into a competitive industry and as a woman, you've done it as someone who came from a background where that was not expected of you, and everything that was in your path suggested that you shouldn't be trying to attain that. So take heart in the fact that A, you're here today, and B, that what you have to offer is valuable, your perspective is valuable, especially I imagine in something like PR or advertising and marketing, where you're trying to represent the ideas and interests of sort of the national population. And just keep going. That's the other thing. Keep going, become successful, pass it down.
Thank you. That was so inspiring.
Oh, thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.